the construction of this pattern, of this matrix for humans. And I mean, we talked about this in the previous episodes. But what it says is that it stems from two patterns. One that comes from heaven. It's called the 13 tones of creation, and it's 13 tones that they built. Through that everything was built. This is what it says. And then we have the 20 seals of destiny, which are that's the local pattern, the local sequence. And each one, I mean, we're not going to talk about the sequences themselves because it's a long each one is a long topic. But how humans are like this, they stem from this divine sequence, and then you have this local sequence that adapts to the environment, to this local universe, or non-local universe, this local world, which is the earth. And and then the focus or the nucleus is the sun, and that's how it tells you it's a system. So this second sequence that I was talking about comes from the local, the earth. And the original one, or the first one, the 13 tones, comes from heaven, from God. So you have this local sequence that gets together with this original sequence from heaven, and together they create this pattern of 260 days, or 260 combinations that create the Solkin. They together combine and make this matrix of 260 energies, combinations of frequencies, and actually each day has a different energy, and it repeats every 360. It's a cycle, so every 260 days it repeats itself. So I wanted to get your take on this idea that there's a cosmic or divine sequence in a local, more mundane sequence that together make the human being.
Well, I mean, we're all made up of atoms, okay? And if you look at the pattern of the atom, it is played out in the pattern of our solar system. And then you look at that and you see that it's played out in other places in the universe the same way. And that, there are like spiral galaxies, and there are all different kinds of galaxies. But this idea of, something revolving around a center, okay, well, that, by my belief, that originated in paradise, and an area around paradise that I refer to as Havana. But it is a to me, it is a divine pattern. I believe that it is a pattern that is gifted by God, to us, and that, what scientists have done is that scientists have brought to the attention of the general public this pattern, that we started teaching people about, or understanding the pattern of the solar system. And then when we got to where we could, look at atoms, things down on the atomic level, and then when we began to look at how particles respond to each other on on the particle level of light physics, there's different, different ways to look at it. But this pattern that we see again and again, this interplay of energies, is very much like, if you look in human biology, there are cycles within human biology. I mean, there's, of course, the best known cycle is the menstrual cycle for women, but there are many cycles that occur. There's your sleep cycle, for a better example of things. There are cycles of different hormones in your body, at different times during the day, and also during your whole life cycle. Okay, when your biology is much different when you're older than when you were younger. We all recognize that, but they are all, these interplay of cycles. And when you want to look at the human body, and you get into particularly hormones and endocrinology, and how those affect the cycles, like even your eating cycle, when you're hungry, when you're not, all these cycles that make up part of our lives. But then cellularly, there are also cycles going on where there are cells that are replaced at a higher rate than other cells. It's the fact that you can lose a large part of your liver, and your liver will regenerate itself. Okay. And so there are these cycles that do occur at the cellular level in the human body. um all of this is these are the patterns that are there.
Well,
What science does is that science is able to elucidate them and understand them more, so that to either like maybe cure disease, or at least explain why you can't sleep at night, or
yeah,
whatever. It gives you
it's
a good,
interesting.
it may be a good explanation, and some ways to possibly treat a problem, or explain a behavior, or whatever you're
It's
wishing to
understanding
try.
these better.
What?
What you're saying, Margie, understanding these patterns that we can see how we can fix them or not fix them,
Well,
but
some of them are, you some of them you definitely would like to fix. I mean, people that have trouble sleeping would really like for us to be able to to cure their insomnia. Okay. But there are things that allow you to help people, make hopefully make their lives better, in the sense that they don't consider themselves suffering from something, whatever. I mean, look at people that have thyroid, like thyroid disease. Thyroid is such a huge controller of your metabolism, a lot. Okay. And it wasn't until about 20 years ago they kept wondering why people that were like in ICUs would develop a thing called ICU psychosis. It's where they couldn't really stay in reality. Things were really, and then they found out two things that were really important. One is that almost everybody that's in the ICU for more than 48 hours becomes what is referred to as euthyroid sick. And in other words, their thyroid ceases functioning. And so that's one thing. The other thing is that now when you go into an ICU, you don't see the bright lights on all the time. But up until about 20 years ago, there were bright lights on all the time. And the thing is that our brain, needs to have dark to be able to reset itself. Okay. And so these are the sort of cycles that happen that we have to understand, so that we don't do things that mess them up, because we're and so that's what science does. And so now, people that are in really bad situations in ICUs, either by injury or illness, their sleep times are more, they take note of those. The light that's in the room, and they check their thyroid and see if they need thyroid hormone replacement, or whatever, so that they don't develop these conditions that are really hard to, I mean, it does nothing to help them get better. Okay. And so there are all these little sort of cycles I mean, that's what science is about, is they're trying to figure these things out in many cases to help people manage things within their lives. And we live in a very complicated society now. We're not living in a hut out in a field where we don't have light, and it automatically becomes dark, and we go to sleep and we get up. I mean,
yeah,
that's what our biology was based on, but that's not the biology, that's not the reality that we live in now. Okay. So we need to understand our biology to know how to manipulate our environment to make us healthier and able to have coping mechanisms for the society that we do live in now. So
that's interesting, Margie. We started this talking about that, or I was saying that that humans are created by these two sequences, one emanating from Habana, as we called it, from heaven, one stemming out from our local world, and together we make this divine human creature, which is human beings. So that's, but then we moved into the concept of patterns and sequences. And what you were saying is very interesting, that science kind of, uh, finds and studies these sequences, these patterns, in order to, first of all, understand them. Second of all, try to see if you can change them. And you were giving us some very good examples of how to break some patterns. And I want to go beyond, the physical and the patterns that, may be very evident, but patterns that we create, and these are the patterns that, uh, virtuous or vicious cycles that we create, and that's very interesting, because sometimes we kind of fall victim to life. And I want to bring this, and I don't know why it came to my mind now that we're talking about patterns, but the good patterns that we can develop, and the bad patterns that we can develop, and we were saying that we're sort of slaves to the pattern of time, of aging, of the material life, that, or the material body that we have. But we do have certain opinion, or certain range of action, when we talk about the mind and when we talk about the spirit. It's not that we're just evolving. It would be very easy, everybody just grows in spirit, and we get to a certain point and everybody just gets smart. And something that life has taught me, that you don't get smart. You were saying about that. You can be 80 years old, 90 years old, and you're not smart. And maybe you have a 10-year-old that's really smart, So it's interesting how maybe we can't control certain patterns, or we participate in certain patterns, and some certain patterns that we just have to adapt to. I don't know.
We have choices. We have free will choice to make decisions, for ourselves. Okay. And these choices, everybody wants them to be black and white, this is bad and this is good. And a lot of choices are, but a lot of choices are not, they're sort of like shades of gray, and you realize that, if I do this, then this could happen and that could happen. And that may be okay, but then it might, not be okay on this side, but it may be okay on that side. And so, but we still have to make, we do make choices, or we kind of opt out and it just sort of roll with
Mhm.
whatever time throws at us. And the people that I've seen that have done that, I have to say, I can't say that they're incredibly happy, people. They don't seem to be very in charge of their own lives, but a lot of times they've opted to not be. Okay. And I, I in many ways, I think we need to have great compassion for those people, because they are not accessing and using that free will choice that God has given us. Okay. We that's what God gave us, and we should, we should exercise that. Not all of our choices are going to be good, and there are ones that we're going to do that are not going to be good, but we have to learn to make amends, forgive ourselves,
We have to make
learn.
the mistake
Yeah,
and be able to learn from that
learn.
mistake.
Yeah, you'll always learn so much more from your mistakes. I'll just tell you, I learned. You talk to any scientist, and they'll tell you that for every one experiment that succeeded, they had 99 that failed. Okay, and you learn so much more. And this has been one of the big downfalls of science, is that we don't have a journal where people talk about their failures, so that people are constantly reinventing these old failures that people, if you had been able to talk to and knew what they had done in their lab, you would have never gone down that road. But you don't know, because they don't tell you what didn't work. They only tell you what did work. And that's a bad mistake, because now with AI, having all that negative stuff that we didn't know, we can use all that. Okay.
Exactly.
Right.
Well,
But
I
we don't
think
have, yeah. So
AI
that
can
was a
dig it out.
choice. Yeah. That was a choice that we made way back when, which was not necessarily advantageous to us now. Okay. But we have to go forward. Okay. With what we've got. And so I foresee in the future that hopefully labs, once we get over this thing about, you can only publish positive, good results that support your hypothesis and all that. If they could also at the end of their papers publish everything they tried that didn't work, that would
Well,
be really helpful,
that saves you a lot of time and a learning curve. I mean,
Right.
that's something, and something, that I learned in life, academically. I learned how to do this, in sales and how to engage in business. But this is something that I also learned, empirically, just from experiencing life. You first have to go in small steps, kind of test out the waters. You don't jump into the water. You first kind of touch it, see if it's cold, if it's hot. Then you kind of have. But if you don't touch it, you're not gonna learn of it. And
Right.
and, and you're saying it's very important. All the mistakes that are out there that we don't know about that could save so much time. It's very important, and you're right. Scientists know that to reach the one conclusion, you first have to mess up 99
Yeah,
more.
right. And so you hear about the positive ones, you don't ever hear about, all those negative ones. But I mean, that's the life of a scientist, and in some other professions it's the same way. But we all learn from experience and we make choices, okay? And so it's the choices that we make, choices that we make emotionally and particularly spiritually, about, that affects not only your life but perhaps the people, around you. Okay. And so, but there are ways to, in my particular experience, my personal experience, spiritually, I pray. I pray with people, and I pray myself to develop my relationship with God. um it doesn't inform my science per se. It informs how I relate to the other scientists around me, as
Okay.
fellow children of God, at doing the best they can at the moment with what they have. That's what I think is expected, okay, or what we should at least strive for. And so we make, um, decisions, emotionally we make decisions, sometimes, flash emotions. I don't like that person. They hurt me. They did, this. And we learn, I think, as we go through. And this is another thing I found out about a lot of young people. Young people have a lot more compassion in my experience than older people do. And sort of like, you should know this and, get on with it. But the younger people seem to get the thing about compassion. I mean, they get what Jesus said about compassion. And um I'm just, it just really blows me away, that that people actually use the word compassion now. I mean, when I was growing up, we very rarely ever heard the word, compassion, except maybe in church when they were talking about Jesus. But beyond that, it was not. Now people realize that compassion. You're not a weak person when you show, compassion, and, and that you have what they call emotional intelligence to know, when something requires compassion. Okay. It just sort of shows how we are evolving. Um, in many ways, I see a lot more compassion being, evinced on the world, in the world, than I thought I would see during my lifetime, actually. And so, um, I'm glad I've lived to see it, develop that much so
Well,
far. So,
well, that's great. Your story, Marjorie, and how you see this, and how you frame with the science, and how the different generations have built on the previous ones, how we are influenced by patterns, and the sequences that are around, some that we have control over, maybe not complete control, but we do have an opinion and a say in them, and can contribute. Like you were saying, there's some people that kind of just are on the fringe, or they're not really involved in certain things, and some people that do get involved. And it depends. One of the things that I mentioned before is that there's three types of energy. You know, the positive, the negative, or the qualities. You know, positive, negative, and neutral. And you were saying about prayer and the way that we conduct ourselves, the decisions, and we kind of in a way are also making that decision if we want to be a negative, if we want to be a positive, if we want to be a neutral in the configuration of and the unfolding of this universe.